a qualitative study. From a qualitative study, what your objectives are. Again, what your objectives are, that would define your type of research that you undertake, type of design that you choose, and in turn that would shape what methods or tools you choose. Okay, I hope it's clear. So then when you do any research, usually you do it with the sample. I think I touched upon it in the last session, that if you are actually collecting data from the whole population that your research is regarding, then that's a census. However, most research is done with a sample. That is, you will not go and interview everybody from that population, but choose a sample through various methods. Depending again on your research design, the scope of this lecture is not to go into the types of sampling, because the samplings also differ for your quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches. Within them also there are different samplings depending on your research question, depending on your populations. Okay, and then again so sample is basically the part of the population from where you collect data, from where your responses would come, the people you would interview or give your survey questionnaires to. Coming to the methods of data collection, again, there can be various methods. There are very different innovative methods that are being used currently in the research field. However, I am only going to discuss some very common ones. So the first one is an interview. An interview again could be, you could interview somebody for an hour or two in detail, asking them to narrate everything they've experienced regarding this issue that you are researching. Or it could just be a 20 question or 10 question questionnaire which you give out to them and ask them to fill. Or it could be a 20 question questionnaire which you ask them, like you sit in front of them, you ask them and you fill in the answers. But the answers are one word or multiple choice one from a multiple choice question. So those could be the different kinds of interviews that you take. Then you could do group discussions. These are more common for qualitative data collection, because here the discussions are usually more detailed, more intense, where you basically have a group of people, stakeholders who are affected by or affect the issue that you are researching. And then you basically, as a researcher, you just act as a facilitator and you let the group discuss about the issue. For example, again, if I am saying the experience of sexual violence and its relation or its relation to a certain disability, then maybe in the group I have people with different disabilities, or I have people with a certain disability, whatever the way you want to divide your groups, depend again on your questions and design. And then I basically maybe give them I maybe just give them some points to start the discussion, and in between, if the discussion is going haywire, I come in and provide props, but I would majorly stay out of it, in the sense I would not participate or say too much, and I would let the group discuss the issue. Maybe if the group discussion is regarding their experiences, I let them discuss the experiences that they have had, how they have felt about it, I just act as a driver, giving it direction now and then, but letting the participants discuss whatever they feel about the issue. And then there is observation, which can be, there are different kinds of observations. There are so it can be where you actually is very, very systematic. Okay. Where you have things that you actually have a list of things that you need to observe, and you actually make observations regarding those particular things. You make notes, or maybe record or whatever, depending on what kind of observation you have chosen for your study. Or you can do a very open kind of an observation where you do not actually have any set of questions or things to note or observe, but you actually go into the setting and just see for yourself. For example, in an exploratory research project where I'm not very aware of the field or of people or of the habits of the sample that I am going to collect data from, I would maybe go with not with a set of points of observation, but maybe with a more open list where I am just, randomly trying to understand how they behave, what are their common practices regarding a certain thing, or, and then maybe I decide how to go further. Observation can be participant or non-participant. It is a very broad binary. There are different, what do you say, place spots in between the continuum where you take different roles as a researcher. So, but to be very, very black and white, participant observation would be one where you are actually a part of the phenomena that you're observing. For example, if I am studying the behavior of students in a library and I choose observation as a method of my data collection, and I as a student also go to library and study there, then maybe I then as a student who's actually doing that practice which I am going to observe, that is studying in the library, then I have adopted participant observation. On the other hand, non-participant observation, as the name suggests, would be that I am an outsider. I stay out from the phenomena and I observe it as a non-involved person who's just observing the activity and is not actually involved in it. So if I am somebody who's not a student, who does not go to the library or study, but is interested in the phenomena, and I go to the library maybe every day or once a day and take around and see what students are doing, then that would be a non-participant observer. Is it clear till here? I know this is very basic and a lot of you might find it very banal, but still. Any questions if you have? Okay. So now once we have decided the methods, how we want to collect our data, we get on to our tools. The tools are basically instruments from which we collect data. For example, if I am doing an interview, if I am doing a interview, I prepare an interview schedule where I write down. So that set of 20 questions that you're going to ask the participant or respondent is your tool. That it's usually called an interview schedule. Or if you are not filling it yourself and you're giving it to the person who has to to the respondent to fill it, then it becomes a questionnaire. Okay. So depending on how the data is being collected, the tools vary. So obviously, if I'm giving it out to the respondent to fill it on their own, then maybe the instructions would be more detailed, and that questionnaire would have sections or maybe not sections, and the questions would be in a certain sequence, the way I want them to answer. I will take care that if there is any information that I don't want revealed until and unless a certain question is answered, I will make sure that it's not, there until after that question. In a schedule, I might, if I am the interviewer and I'm asking the other person, I might maybe flow through the schedule or move up and down the schedule if and when required. And so the construction of both might differ. A guide is usually a less strict set of questions, especially in in-depth interviews or longer detailed interviews that you would take, where you just, for yourself as an interviewer, you would write maybe the probes that you would want to ask, the broader areas that you would want to touch upon during the interview. Mostly in a sequence you would want to go, maybe not, depending on, because in-depth interviews are actually a lot more fluid. They depend a lot more on the participant also, their responses. And as an interviewer, you have to be open to, changing the set of questions or maybe pruning them a little bit here and there so that the participant is comfortable and the interview goes on smooth. So similarly, observation, if you have a preset criteria of what you want to observe, you would create a schedule where you would number the things. You would actually try to list everything you want to observe, and then you'll write your observations against it. as and when required. On the other hand, a guide, if I'm going for an comparatively open observation, a guide would just maybe give me hints that, okay, you have to be more open to these areas. For example, if I'm going for an observation in the library, a schedule would tell, maybe a schedule an observation an observation schedule would say, observe how many students are there, how many students are there in the computer room, how many students are there in the maybe a different sitting area, what are the students doing. So a lot more, what do you say, stricter set of questions. On the other hand, a guide would just say what the students are doing, how are they studying, so that is a lot more open to my interpretation, just for me to have some focus on what I am studying and not just go haywire on everything. But it's still not very structured, it's not very strict, and I can note down or observe a lot more things than the guide says, as required or as I feel is relevant for my research. Okay, does this make sense? Any questions regarding these? Okay, I assume if there's silence, I assume there are no questions. Again, if you can't speak up due to where you are, you can always drop a question in the chat. I will answer them, if not immediately, maybe at a later point, but I will try to keep an eye on the chat also. So once you have collected your data, what you do, there's one loophole in the presentation. I've not put in anything on data cleaning and transcription. However, I'll just quickly cover that. So if once you have collected your data, what you do is, as I said, if it's quantitative data, what you would do is you would do the data entry. If there are any non-responses, for example, for some questions, if the people have not responded, or if you gave out questionnaires and people have not replied to them, not returned them to you, etc., you would clean that data. You would maybe remove those entries, or for non-response to certain questions, there are ways in statistics where you put in certain values, or so that those non-responses are not counted in your analysis or counted validly. So that's what you do. Again, data entry this is a task to do in research, because in quantitative you have huge sets of data which require entry through whatever softwares you're using. Usually you would start with an Excel, or you can obviously use other softwares, which I'll come to in a while. I'll not go into the details, but still, just to make you aware of these softwares available. And then in qualitative data, you'll mostly transcribe what you have recorded. So usually when you do an interview, you record it, audio record, video record as per required. Or if you're not recording it, you would take notes in your own little notebook, or whatever plan you have to actually collect and remember and store that data. So in qualitative studies, mostly you transcribe, that is, you actually write down or type whatever has been said, type it out, so that then you can work on it. You have it in some tangible form where you can make notes, or do the coding, or whatever analysis plan that you have, you can apply. So analysis basically means that once you have a set of data to work upon, you would go into that, you would run tests, or you would code it, or you would divide it into themes depending on your analysis plan and your research design, so that you can come up with certain conclusions of what the data says about whatever questions you had. Okay, तो आपने जो questions पूछे हैं, आपने research आप क्यों कर रहे हैं, to answer certain questions, और आपने जो questions पूछे हैं उनका आंसर आपको तभी मिलेगा जब जो डेटा आपके पास आया है आप उसे एनालाइज करेंगे, या तो आप उस पर कोई स्टैटिस्टिकल टेस्ट रन करेंगे, या फिर आप उसको कोड करके थीम करके क्वालिटेटिव analysis उस पे run करेंगे, ठीक है? So this is what will lead you to your findings. This is what will lead to your conclusions, to your answers, and it will obviously complete your study. So for quantitative data, you have various statistical tests. Hypothesis is generally, you have a hypothesis in quantitative study. In qualitative study, you may or may not have it. We usually do not have hypothesis. So for hypothesis testing in quantitative studies, you run different statistical tests. These statistical tests will, so if you remember that I discussed about variables in the last session, those are the things that you actually collect data about and run tests on to actually see if they are related or not related. So statistical tests can actually, there are different types of tests. So one set of tests will tell you if the variables, for example, gender-based violence and disability are related or not. Is there a correlation? So for those who are somewhat familiar with statistics, there are tests which will tell you if they are correlated or not, if a change in one affects a change in another or not. But then correlation does not tell you if one causes the other or not. It just tells you that if both of them change together or not. Yeah. Then you have tests which actually, which are called comparison tests, which actually tell you if there is a difference between two sets of data. So if you are doing an evaluation study and you collected a data before the whatever project or whatever intervention was there implemented, and then you collected data post intervention, then if you if you want to compare the two sets of data to see if the intervention has an impact, then you have a different category of tests for that. Those are called tests for comparison of means. Then there are tests which actually tell you, which actually help you identify if there is a causal relationship between two or more variables, where you can actually see if change in one causes a change in other. So correlation will only tell you that if change in one is related to change in another, it does not necessarily cause the change in another. While the tests which are for causation, they'll tell you if change in one, for example, if there is a change in intake of coffee, then does it change the quality of sleep? That would be your last set of tests. So these are some basic categories which are there, which are usually employed. There are other tests, I'm sure, but I am not an authority on statistics, definitely, so I'm not going into details. This is just an idea to tell you what all kinds of relationships and things you can find through these analysis. Okay, so this is for quantitative data. Usually thematic analysis or qualitative analysis would be done for a set of data which is qualitatively collected through group discussions, through in-depth interviews, maybe through journaling, or even maybe through, if not verbal or written form, then maybe through drawings or other forms. So as I said, there are various innovative ways of data collection that are being employed nowadays. For example, with children, art is one of the ways through which data is collected. So there are ways to actually analyze that also. There are some set rules or procedures that you can follow. These analysis, again, there are different types of analysis. For example, there's content analysis, where you would actually actually go into what has been said, what words have been used, and you may divide the data into different themes. For example, if I have interviewed somebody about their experience of sexual or gender-based violence and disability, then maybe I have themes like lived experience, or maybe a fear of heightened vulnerability, for example, or maybe a lack of support. So these might be themes that come up. Themes are basically things that come up through your that come up in your data that people have talked about, okay, and over, or maybe even if not over and over, but you think is an important thing is an important element of your study. And so those themes are actually identified by reading and rereading those transcripts. You use color coding is a very common way through which this analysis is done, where you actually use different colors to identify different kinds of things that people have talked about. Or there are other types of, for example, there's the discourse analysis, where you actually analyze the communication in which people have participated or people engage in, and you maybe record or get hold of written or verbal communications which are naturally done in an environment, and actually analyze how do they reflect attitudes or maybe beliefs about a certain thing. So these are the different kinds of analysis that you may engage in case of qualitative data. So then again, analysis can be software assisted. As I said, there are different softwares that you can use for analysis. For example, if you have a quantitative data set, you can use softwares like SPSS, R, Python, even Excel. MS Excel is used to run various tests. You can run a test of correlation. You could find out I-square for the data. You could run an ANOVA test, t-test, different kinds of tests which you could run using those softwares. For qualitative data also, we have softwares now. For example, NVivo and AtlasTI are the most common ones that are used, where you can actually, so in qualitative data sets, they won't actually find you an answer, but they would just help you to, as I said, you use color coding and you use things like that, you identify themes. They would just help you keep all that stuff together in one software, and you do not have to go through like pages of data to run your analysis. Or you could do it by yourself, not using software, which is not very common now, especially in quantitative research. In qualitative research also, it's getting less and less common. However, if you do not have a very huge data set, you can do it by hand on paper. And yeah. So any questions regarding analysis? Analysis plan in quantitative studies, you usually set it beforehand. You have a set analysis plan that you'll run on the data you collect through these measures. Qualitative studies are more, I would say, reflexive and more flexible in the sense that you do plan, but there is an opportunity to actually tinker a little bit with what your plan is, depending on what you find out on the field, because the field is not always the way you imagine it to be. So that's how it works. If you have any questions at this point, please.
Bhavya, Pooja Yadav has requested to explain discourse analysis again.
Yes, I just saw it. I will do it. So discourse analysis, it's basically discourse analysis relates to analysis of what, again, there are, in linguistics, there are different definitions for discourse and different schools of thought that use different definitions. But to give you a sense, a discourse regarding any issue is the kind of communication that's been going around that issue. Okay, it might be what kind of concepts are there, what kind of definitions exist, what people for example, if I say a word gender, or maybe so a discourse a discourse around gender would be things that people associate with gender. How is it defined? What are the connotations that it has? Okay, for example, female if we say female, there are certain connotations. It is also, so a discourse is also context specific. For example, a discourse around gender in India would be different from maybe a discourse around gender in the US, for example. There might be similar things, there might be different things. So a discourse is what kind of discussions, what understandings, what connotations people have regarding a certain idea or concept. It's usually abstract, it's not tangible. But when you engage in discourse analysis, what you do is you actually study the kind of language Language, not in the sense of only verbal language, but maybe maybe all the other forms of communication as well, which are used to actually communicate regarding that aspect. For example, if I am engaging in discourse analysis regarding gender, I might I have to limit my scope, because discourse analysis regarding gender is very broad. And I say, okay, I am going to do a discourse analysis around gender, uh, around how gender is represented or shown in newspapers, has been represented in newspapers in the last 10 years. So now what I do, uh, again, this is very hypothetical, 10 years is a long time, but what I do is I actually collect news articles around the issue, around the concept that I have chosen, and then I see how the newspapers have communicated things regarding gender. It might involve how they have reported gender related crimes. It might include maybe who has reported. For example, I can also do an analysis of uh, you know uh, how different news has been represented in different. For example, there especially regional newspapers usually have those weekly periodicals which are more focused for you know uh, on women, and how a certain news has been dealt with in that piece and in the usual newspaper piece. Or maybe I can go into not only through their language and reporting, how the newspapers have created a discourse around gender through the advertisements that they have shown. Okay. So in discourse analysis, I'll go into how the communication around the certain issue that I am concerned with has been shaped, or has changed during the period, whatever I've chosen for my analysis. Again, within discourse analysis, there are subtypes. I'm not going into that. It's mostly it's used a lot in the linguistics field, but yeah, I
Ma'am,
hope this
I
gives
have
you
a question.
yes.
Ma'am, discourse analysis could be discourse within the scholarship or academics. But
Yes,
if we have to incorporate, like, let's suppose the discourse related to disability in the last few years, etc. So would we take the discourse of general public, or like the academic knowledge? I mean, how do we go about it? I mean, it's a little confusing.
see, if you want to incorporate in your study, in your research, you would mostly go with the academic discourse, because as a researcher, what you're doing, again, it depends on the kind of study that you're doing and the purpose of the use of your study, the audience. But as an academician or as a researcher, where you are actually going to add to the knowledge base, you would go with the discourse that has been done. So when you do your literature review, you would read about the studies, okay, about what theories have been what do you say, have been brought up or have been uh, formulated around that issue, and you use that uh, in your study to actually give a sense of how this has changed, or this has shaped, or how previous academic engagement with the issue has shaped the discourse which is currently in practice. Okay. But so usually you would do that. But if your study is a discourse analysis on maybe uh, the issue of disability in India, then you would obviously use the uh, communications that are being engaged in India in the general public. Are you getting my point?
Yes,
Does
ma'am.
it make sense? So if you're doing a discourse analysis, so if your research is a discourse analysis of something, then you would probably go with the again, then you can narrow down your study. Obviously, I could say that I'm doing a discourse analysis of how disability has been defined or presented in the academic circles in Indian academia or research circles, or I could say how it has been presented, or how it has changed. For example, I could do a discourse on how nationhood has been, the discourse around nationhood has changed in the last 10 years. Okay. Here I would obviously go with the how the general use of nationhood and the idea has been used. Okay. But if I'm doing research on nationhood in general and it does not go into the discourse analysis, or I'm doing something else, or maybe even if I'm doing this, when I'm doing my literature review, I would like to go into a discourse around how nationhood has been defined through the academic circles, from when it was conceived and how it has gone and why, maybe, depending on the scope of your study. So you would actually, mostly if you are engaging in a detailed research, you would go into the discourse, academic discourse regarding that issue while you are planning your study. But for the general thing, it depends on what questions you have and what analysis you're planning. You would not always do a discourse analysis of what the general public's view or how it is being conceived in general is.
Okay, ma'am. Thanks.
Okay. Hope it makes sense. So moving forward, if there are no more questions, how do you? Okay. So as I said, Santosh, I am not an expert on disability. I would not like to, I'm sorry, but I would not like to go into this. I hope Akshay or somebody else from here can actually find somebody who can better answer your question. Or maybe I can after I get some time to actually look into it. And I hope that's fine. I'm sorry. So once your analysis is done, your next step is to actually write down your research. When I say write down, it's so when a research is done, it's not like that you do everything and then you sit down to write it and you finish it. It's usually a recursive process where you write some parts and then you do some things and then you write other parts and then you edit, and it's back and forth and back and forth. But as a step, I just because that's the final product, so that's why I have put it in the end, towards the end. So research writing is a very important part of any research project because obviously you're doing a research for a purpose. You would usually nobody would do it just for fun. Even if you're doing it for fun or just for your own personal knowledge, you would want to share what you found out. Okay, so therefore writing is a very important part of any research project. How you write, what you write would depend again on the purpose of why you did that research, what methods and design you chose for that research, what your audience is, what your audience is, what is your personal capacity. Okay, how far you want your research writings to go or research findings to go. Obviously everybody would want to spread them as much as possible, but there are limitations to that. So all these factors shape how you actually write your research. So as I said already, as I mentioned, sharing your research findings is as important as its conduction, because until and unless you share what you have found, there's no real use of what you have done. You've invested your time, you've invested your energy to something. You've always obviously also invested some resources, maybe funds, to gain some knowledge which needs to be shared, either for better implementation of certain plans, either to plan an action, either to just promote academic debate about how we have been dealing with a certain issue. So for all of that, it's important that you put it in a tangible form in which people can actually read about it or learn about it so that they can engage with it. So writing, again, the ways of dissemination can vary. It's not always necessary that you write it in a certain form and submit it and disseminate it. There are different ways that are coming up now. Videography, filmography, art, poster making, all of this is being adopted more and more. However, writing is the most common way as of now for sharing research findings, and that's why if you are a researcher or if you plan to become a researcher, writing is a skill that will come handy to you a lot. Okay, and this is one area where I think a lot of us as researchers struggle sometimes because we are not trained, neither are we told to train ourselves to write so much and for better communication. So this is one area which I think is, you know, a little bit neglected than the other aspects of when we are taught research and when we are told about research. So it is a skill which I think should be developed by anybody who wants to, take up research. As I said, research, your research findings, your conclusions, your interpretations, your suggestions after what you have found can be shared through different media platforms. So you could write a research article, which is maybe published in a journal, an academic journal, and all those who subscribe to that journal who are interested in the particular area can actually have access to it. You could actually come up with a book based on your research. Okay, you could print it as a book in a book form, which is then more easily available to the general public. Also, it's not limited to the subscribers of that particular journal where you have published. In today's time, you can always write blog posts. People even have discussions on certain research on sites like Twitter. Okay, so you could do that. There you can present it in a form of posters. So it's very common these days to have poster presentations and conferences and seminars, where if you do not have a full-fledged article regarding your research, or you do not have a time to present that, you can actually present what you have found or about your through your research and the way you've conducted your research through a poster. So these are some ways of dissemination. And yeah, now when you are actually, as I said, a few things on writing, when you're actually planning to disseminate your research or writing your research or putting it into some tangible form so that others can know, as I said, know who your audience is. If you are if I am, for example, I am a PhD scholar, I want to write a PhD thesis. My primary audience would be either my colleagues or other scholars from the field, or my supervisor and other faculty members who would maybe judge my thesis and decide if it's worth it or not worth it. And or maybe other scholars who would later want to read about the issue that I'm working on and want to learn about what I have found or what other researchers, as I said, when you do a literature review, you want to learn about what other people have done and found in your field. So then the way I write would be very different from if I'm writing an evaluation report, a research findings for an evaluation that I did for a particular program or intervention, or if I'm writing for the general public. For example, I did a research on the state of government schools in a particular city, and I want the public to know that this is the state and this is how the schools are functioning or whatever. Then the way I write would be very different. Although all writing from my point of view should not be very jargon laden, should not use very heavy words that are very difficult to understand. But if I'm writing for the general public, if I'm writing a blog post about my research, I would use a much simpler language than I would use in a research article. Similarly, the structure of my article or the structure of my blog would be very different from a research article, where I would maybe go a lot more into the review, into the literature, a lot more into the methodology, why certain methodology was used and why not the other things were used. On the other hand, in the blog post, I will maybe not go so much into that, but focus more on the findings and what my suggestions are regarding. Okay. So, so this is where more or less, once you've disseminated the results of your research, this is where your research project, I would say, would more or less end. There's always scope of further engagement, which you can be a part of through maybe personal communication or through discussions or through seminars and all of that. But this is where you, as a researcher, as an individual, your part of researching would end. Somebody has asked for writing tips. I think we have a session on writing and research writing in the coming weeks. I think you'll get a lot of tips then. So if you can, please just wait, because that is not the scope of this particular presentation here. So there's one more important aspect regarding research that I want to discuss, and it is research ethics. It is the ethics are the values that that would guide us throughout the process, telling us what we should do and what we should not engage in while we are actually doing a research project from a point of view of from an ethical point of view, from the point of view that if that's acceptable by the standards or not acceptable by the standards. So this is, though I'm mentioning it in the end, it begins with when you start conceiving your research. Okay, what questions you're asking, what participants you would have. All those, when you make all those decisions, your research ethics are involved. They should be if they're not. Okay, how you are writing, how you're collecting your data, how you're storing your data. Research ethics are involved in all of this. And these again are sometimes sidelined, I believe, although they are mentioned in almost all researchers now, and it's always good, especially in the Western countries. It's necessary to actually get an ethical approval for your research project. In India also, it's becoming more and more common, and I hope it stays that way. It becomes common, but it is important because sometimes if the research is not done ethically, it can either harm the participants, or it can lead to, or some researchers may actually engage in practices which actually do not provide us with reliable results, or are done with ulterior motives. For example, there have been researches where the data was completely fabricated, there was manipulated data was used, or maybe the participants or respondents were not treated correctly, which is not we would want as researchers. Okay, if we are working with people, for people, we want that we provide them with authentic information. We want that they are treated well, so that they also understand the importance of research. They understand that it is important for various things, and they are happy to be a part of different research projects that they come across. Okay. So as I said, social research deals with society for knowledge promotion, and so therefore it becomes more important because we are dealing with people all the time, all through the process, and it's important that we keep in mind that we are treating them right. We are not taking undue advantage. We are not fooling them. We are not telling them things that are not true. And ethics are not only important from the standalone point of morality or ethics, that this is right and this is not right, but it's also important for making this research very scientific, relevant, and fair. So if, for example, if I'm fabricating my data, no matter what my findings are, they won't be relevant. They'll be misleading because they are not based on authentic data. Okay. So I am saying something just so that I become popular, or maybe my agenda is met, but then that research doesn't have relevance in the longer run, and sooner or later people might identify that it's not reliable, and that also affects my personal credibility as a researcher, which I don't think anybody would want. But apart from that selfish reason, we are engaging in research to provide some knowledge that is helpful in some way for the people that we are working for and with. And therefore, we must make sure that whatever research we are doing is relevant, is scientific. So if we are not ethical in our practices, then our research doesn't remain scientific, because then we have not, the data we have collected is not authentic, or the methods that we are adopting are only we are adopting them only because they're easy to go by. So therefore, the rigor, the scientific, the credibility, that doesn't come across in our research. That doesn't, it's not up to the level. Now, ethics can relate to the participants of your research. So, for example, if you are engaging, especially in in quantitative research, also these are important, obviously, but things like respect, mutual respect, and these become more important when you are dealing with people in qualitative data collection methods, because then you are interacting with them a lot more. In a quantitative survey where you're providing questionnaire, maybe you're not actually contacting or talking to people so much, and therefore your interaction with them does not matter so much. However, it's always good to not take it lightly, because you always want to be respectful and you want to make people feel that they are important for what they are contributing to your research. Then there's confidentiality. For example, if somebody's telling you, this becomes more important in issues, for example, that we deal with, which are sensitive. If people are confiding in you and telling you some of their very personal experiences, or sharing information about what they would not normally discuss with anybody else, then it's your responsibility as a researcher that you actually respect that and you keep it that way. You don't go about telling people what they have told you, okay? Or you do not provide the data that they have provided to you to anybody else without their consent. Then there's the issue of informed consent, which is very, very central to any research. If you are making people participate in your study, they must know what they are signing up for. This has become more and more important over the years. So, for example, in lab and scientific and science related researches, there have been controversies where people did not know what they are signing up for, or and then they have had repercussions. Similarly, even in social science researches, it's very important, because in a lot of research, social science research, especially, I come from social work background, so I would give an example from that. For example, in social work research, a lot of times what happens is, when we are dealing with people, when we are going to them to ask to participate in a certain research project, we often go through organizations, or some central gatekeeper person who introduces us to the participants, and there are often unsaid expectations that arise. So if, for example, if I'm going through an organization which provides them with different services, they might expect that if they participate, they'll get better services, or if they don't participate, they will not get those services. And it's important as a researcher that I make clear to them that, okay, I have come through this organization or so and so, but whatever you do or whatever you decide regarding this research doesn't affect your relationship with that particular organization or with that particular person. And whatever you say remains between us, it doesn't go out. Then there's the issue of privacy, there's the issue of comfort, where you collect data, how you collect data, how you disseminate it, who are you sharing it with, where do you store it. So data privacy is very important. How do you make it how do you keep it confidential, and what if somebody gets hold of your data? How do you make sure that they do not know whose data that is? How do you do that? All of that is it should be a part of your research plan. It relates to ethics, and it you must think about it from the very beginning of when you conceive your research. And depending on the kind of research, your participants, your population, your stakeholders of your research, your ethics may vary. For example, the ethical issues for researching with children would be different from researching with maybe adult males in certain jobs. Okay, just giving you an example, just in comparison. For example, researching with people with disability would have more ethical repercussions, and you would have to maybe consider a lot more things than you would have to consider for some other population. In quantitative approach, if you're adopting that, then how do you clean that data? How do you deal with data non-responses, or how do you deal with all of that also becomes important, and it relates to the ethics that you adhere. Then you have some ethical responsibilities towards the research fraternity. As I said, if you are not ethical or authentic in your research, it affects the image, not only your image, it also affects the image of the entire research community. Because then if those same people are approached by any other researcher for any other project, they'll always they will uh, fall back upon their previous experience, which if was not good, they would not want to participate in any other researches. And except for this part, you also owe something to your fellow researchers who have worked in the similar area or on whose work you are actually building. So for example, if somebody has already done work on the issue that you're working on, it's important if you're taking from them anything, if you are citing them for evidence or for supporting your arguments, it's very important that you reference, you cite them properly, you state that this idea has been taken from this and this person, which can be done in different ways, multiple ways. There are different schools of referencing depending on your discipline. You can choose one, but it's very important that you do that and you do not take credit for somebody else's work, because then that's clearly just not right. Okay. And you are open about the methods you have adopted. You are open about how did the process go by, what did you do, how were the results analyzed, because as researchers we need to know. It's not if I, as a researcher, I'm reading something that you did, not only your findings are not important to me. Not important. It is important what you found about how people with disability see or experience gendered violence. But at the same time, it's also very important because if I am a new researcher who's coming into the field, how you went about collecting the data, what methods you adopted, why did you adopt them, how did you approach the participants, what kind of difficulties you faced while you were in the field. All of this is very important to me because I will learn from it. Okay, I learn from it. Or if I am a seasoned researcher who has worked in the area or who has researched a lot, and if I read something and I see, okay, maybe this thing, because you said that you have only, interviewed 5 people, therefore your findings, although, true for your data set, but these findings are not applicable to such and such population or whatever. And I can engage in discussion and debate and whatever. But it's important to actually state it out clearly. And as I already mentioned, data sets must be authentic. Fabrication, manipulation in the sense that you're rewriting the entries, you're changing just to get certain results, that is completely unacceptable. And then you have ethical responsibilities towards the larger society. For example, okay, as a PhD scholar, there is obviously no other conflict of interest. I just want to finish my PhD. I want to submit a thesis and prove to everybody that I can do research. But if you are maybe researching for an organization, you're researching for a certain company, for example, a lot of marketing research, if you are engaged in that, it's important to disclose who you are working for, who funded your research, because as researchers, we are, whether we accept it or not, we are influenced by the obviously if I am not self-funding my research and it's being funded by a certain company who has the interest in, for example, if I'm researching the impact of a drug, and the pharma company which has made that drug obviously has an what do you say, interest in the usefulness of that drug. Okay, and if I'm working for them, if they are funding my research, there are high chances that I would present the drug as favorable. Okay, I hope you're getting what I'm saying here. So letting people know where you're coming from is important, because then that tells them how to take those findings. Okay, how to see those findings, how to put them in the larger context. It just puts you in a good spot as a researcher, where you are very, very open about the research whole process, and about what your interests, or what other influences uh, might be there in the project. And then there are ethical responsibilities to yourself. It's important that as a researcher, you ensure, when you plan your research, you ensure your safety. For example, as social sciences researchers, we sometimes deal with issues which are very, very sensitive. For example, somebody researching or doing a research in the area of human trafficking, or maybe other things. It might be in researching mafia gangs. I'm just giving some examples which actually make the risks clear to you. So if I am, as a researcher, if I'm engaging in such areas, or maybe not only physical safety, maybe if you're working on the issues of riots and violence and all of this, there is the issue of your mental health. Okay, as a researcher, you are also human, and you cannot stay disaffected by all this. So it's important that when you're planning your research, you actually put in measures to ensure your safety. You have some sort of support available if you need it. Then as a researcher, you have to accept that you might not always know everything. There will be points where you will be confused. You have to be accepting to, and also there will be views that will come out that will be contradictory to your views. Maybe you were expecting something else, and something completely different would come up when you are actually researching and analyzing your findings. So as a researcher, you have to be accepting towards that. You have to be open. You have to see that why this has happened. So I mentioned critical thinking when I actually defined research in the first slide last time. So you have to be critical. You have to be thinking. You have to be open. Okay, and you have to be aware about your own biases when you're engaging in research. For example, I may have biases about all of us have biases. Okay, whatever we may say, we may be aware of them, we may not be aware of them. We may give in to them very easily, we may not give in to them very easily, but we have biases. As humans, when we grow up, we grow up in certain contexts, and there are things which are acceptable in some contexts, things which are not acceptable in some contexts, and and even without context, as individuals also, uh, we lean towards certain things and we do not like certain things. That is uh, very, very natural. So, but as a researcher, it's important that we are aware, because why I have put this in ethical responsibility towards self, because if you're not aware of your own biases, you might fall victim to, actually, without knowing, you might present your research in unauthentic ways, just because you do not you do not have that lens on that. Okay, maybe I am seeing it in a certain way, but it might exist in a certain way. And then there is a risk of uh, you know a sense of bias, a sense of privilege that comes with being a researcher. And then that affects how you present your study, how you analyze your study, how you depict the population that you're researching. So that's also very important, because we are writing about a certain population, okay? And how we present them might affect their day-to-day lives, or what interventions they receive or not receive. So we have to be very, very what should I say, very, very aware of it, if nothing else. So before I go forward, this is basically what I have for you to share. This is probably my last slide, where I'm just going to give you some more, I would not say suggestions, but these are just some learnings that I have had throughout my journey of whatever research I have done. It's very short to say as of now, but still. So if you have any questions, if there's anything you want to discuss, please, we can do that. Thank you, Pooja. I'm happy that you're finding it helpful. I'm sure the next session next week would be very, very helpful. And I hope this forms a base for that. And you can then learn a lot more about doing research, actually getting into it, the process of it. Okay, so since I don't see anything else in the chat and there's nobody speaking up, so I'll just uh, come to some points. I've written caveats, but I would just say these are some points you should consider whenever you're you're taking up any research, or when you are actually, even if you're not taking up research based on what I've presented, you might have formed some conception of it at least. So I just want to make sure that that conception is not very narrow. And so, yeah. So when we talk about research, I mentioned it, I think I mentioned it a few times throughout the presentation last week and last time and this time. But there are different forms of research. The forms differ with disciplines. For example, legal research, I think I'm not even touched upon the major forms that are adopted in legal research, and you would learn a lot more about them in next week. But there are different forms. There's no one set definition or definition in the sense you know what research is, and it has to be scientific and rigorous and critical. But with disciplines, the procedures for it change, the steps of it change. Even within disciplines, for example, in social work, we use both quantitative and qualitative approaches. We use different types. We do longitudinal, not so much longitudinal, at least at the PhD level, but at late on a broad, especially in organizational research, we do adopt longitudinal studies. We have experimental designs. We have non-experimental designs. We have studies with data sets where respondents numbered in thousands. We have data sets where respondents or participants is just one. So research is very diverse. It's very diverse, and I 3 or 4 sessions on it would not cover all of it. And obviously, it's always evolving. There are newer forms of research coming up. There are newer forms of approaches that are being developed. Newer methods that are coming up. For example, now online research is a thing, especially with the COVID situation. A lot of us are doing a lot of things online. Research is also being done online. It has been done online before through emails, but the kinds of analysis, as I said, you can now even analyze art forms, drawings, all of that. So that is one thing. Then as a researcher, when you engage in research, this is something very important that I have learned as a research student, that sometimes when we go into researching, we obviously have some expectations, whether we accept it or not. We have expectations regarding the results that we would get. And sometimes it doesn't go to plan. Actually, not sometimes, a lot of times, your research may not go to plan. So if you are doing a quantitative study, if you're going with a set plan where you will have set tools which you cannot change later, which you will have to use the way you have used with the first participant, it's important that you run pilot studies, you run pilot tests. Pilot studies are also important and qualitative, but they have a lot more significance when you are dealing with quantitative studies. Then you have in qualitative study, you may think that you will do a 1 hour interview with a participant, and the interview might just end in 15 minutes. That happened with me. I was in the field and I thought, okay, I'll have interviews, and maybe people will talk about it and they will tell me about how so my research was on how livelihood practices have changed in a certain community. So like I'll ask them how they started, what their parents did, what their grandparents did. And the first interview in field, and I realized that, okay, not everybody will come up to me and speak. Like my first interview, I think ended in 15 minutes, which is very, very less for an in-depth interview. And then obviously I had to reshape how I went on with it. So this is just one example on data collection, but otherwise also you have to be very, very open when you are doing the research. Don't think that if you're not getting what you thought you would get, then your research is not useful. Even if your hypothesis is uh, not true, it doesn't turn out to be true, or the results are not the way you thought they would be. There's a lot to learn. to the process, the way you engage with people, the way you design a certain thing, the way you critically think about. Because I think especially in the Indian education system, especially in schools, we are not really uh, uh, trained to think critically so much. Okay, so when you actually do research, you are critically engaging with a lot of issues, what you're reading, who you are reading, why he or she has said what she has said. All of this is a learning which is very, very useful in the longer run. And research is, if done correctly, if you follow the procedures, if you are actually true to the process, no findings are actually useless. They always tell you something, even if your hypothesis was not true, even if you didn't go with what the established theory, then maybe you learn that okay, there's an exception. Then you maybe, if possible, you can go into why that didn't work, or maybe why this case is an exception, or you can come up with something new, maybe, who knows. But do not go with set uh, assumptions, or beliefs that this is what I want, what I will get. There might be things you want to get from the field. You may not. If you do, very good. If you don't, it's okay. There's always a way to go around and about what you have found. Develop thinking on toes. So as I said, sometimes you do not get what you're expecting. So as a researcher, it's important that you do not panic, and you have those I don't know, you have that sense in yourself that okay, I can think back, I can do it. You have your, obviously, as a student, if you're a research student, you have the support of your supervisor. If you're doing it on an organizational level, you have your colleagues to go to talk to. And don't think of research process, your research project, as an individual journey. Okay, the part, especially if it's qualitative, your participants are there. Even if it's qualitative, there will be people who will be there to support you, whom you can reach out to, whom you should reach. Sometimes we think that okay, this person is not concerned, why should I bother somebody else? But I think as a research community, is important to bother each other, because we learn from each other. I'm not saying that go share your data with somebody, no, because that's breaching the confidentiality. But you can, if you're facing something in the field that you do not know how to deal with, you can go share it with somebody. Okay, you can cross check what analysis plan you have developed with somebody, things like that. So always have that sense, try to have that sense of calm. You will panic, there will be times when you will panic, but have that sense of calm, that okay, you can work on it and about it and around it. And yeah, so. And so when we talk about typologies of research, because I was supposed to give a lecture on types of research, there is no hierarchy, there is no clear division. As I said, you can always mix and merge methods. They are often mixed and merged. And it's not like one approach or one type of research is better than the other type of research. It completely depends on your research objectives and your research questions. Always remember, what you do in your research project will depend on what you have set out to find out. Okay, if you want to find out what people have experienced during the COVID-19 situation, how, if you want to go into the details of their experience, maybe a qualitative narrative approach where they in detail out their what do you say, experiences, would be a more preferable approach than a quantitative questionnaire. But on the other hand, if a question is just how many uh, like, you want to find out what percentages of people actually had stress or faced higher stress levels during COVID-19, then maybe your research design would be completely different, and it's fine. So your research type should come from your research type and design should come from your research questions. What you want to find out, what are your objectives? Okay, you do not go about saying that okay, I want to do a quantitative research, so let's do this, or I want to go do a qualitative research, so let's go do this. No, first you decide what you want to do, and then depending on that, you find out what's more suitable for that, and you go with that. Obviously there are methods that as a researcher with time you become more comfortable with, or you want to engage more in. For example, I have I have been engaging in qualitative research, so maybe that's something that I'm more comfortable with. But in the future, if I'm doing a project which requires a quantitative approach or quantitative methodology, I, as a researcher, I am bound to make sure that that's what is done. If I am not an expert, I bring some expert on board and do it, because just because I am more familiar with qualitative doesn't mean that I'll, what do you say, force that approach on the research project. I hope it makes sense. And then in the end, the intent to research, your intent, your objective, as I said, why do you want to do it? What do you want to find out? That is a key. And always stick to it. Always remember why you're doing what you're doing, because as I said, sometimes if it's not completely organizational where a whole team is doing it, or even if it's organizational where a whole team is doing it, but it's a longer project, you might feel that, okay, this doesn't make sense. But then why you started it in the first place, remembering that might help you to, move on and go ahead and maybe start afresh, maybe take a break, that's okay. Think what's not going your way, discuss what's not going your way, and do it. Yeah, it's interesting. Research is very, very interesting if it's on something that actually matters to you. And I hope all of you engage in some kind of research projects in some way or another and you enjoy it. So that's all from my side. These are the two books that I majorly referred to for this presentation. And here is a link which might be useful. It's again, it's a useful link if you want to learn more about research. And yeah, thank you for your patience and engagement. I think the engagement was higher last time. Maybe the but then today's topic, I know it was very much theoretical, and I was just, it was more of a lecture, but I hope it was helpful. And I will share this presentation. I think you'll get it. And if you have any questions, I'll also share my email ID. Maybe I'll just type it out in the chat. If any of you have any questions or any resources that you might need, because there might be things, I have just touched upon certain things, and there are things I am not an expert on, so I have not maybe not made very clear, but then if I will try to help in whatever way I can. And so that's all from my side. If there are any questions, any discussion points you want to raise, we have some time today. So yeah.
Ma'am, I have a question. Hi, ma'am, Bhavya, ma'am.
Hi.
Ma'am, if we want to measure marginalization in a group, what would be the best way to go forward for it?
See,
I mean,
that's
which tool or research technique should be used for that? How should we go about it?
so if you want to, can you maybe share more details on what do you mean by when you say marginalization? Because because I can then use it as an example if possible.
Okay, like
If
for
you
an
have something in
example,
mind.
how marginalization is shaping the experiences of Dalit women who are disabled, or any other community group. I mean, what are their experiences like? How would we measure that? That's my question.
Okay, yeah. So I think I get what you're asking. So let's say we are just dealing with experiences of Dalit women with disability, of marginality. Now again, here, see, I cannot give you a complete answer, but I can tell you how you can go about it is, first you have to see what other researches have been done on this. Okay, So before you decide your design, it's very important that you review all your literature, read about what you are researching, okay? What has been done, how other researchers have actually measured marginality. What do you, because I'm sure there will be different definitions of marginality. In sociology, it would be defined in different ways, and maybe disability studies. So what are the what do you say, aspects of marginality that you want to measure? Okay, it might be an economic aspect. Maybe you can say their marginalization on the economic front, or on okay, or in the work front, or maybe in terms of job availability, or I'm just giving examples of what are coming to my mind right now. Okay, or you can consider social marginality in the sense that their access to social public places, okay, social institutions, their access to social benefits. So all of this. So you have to read about the issue. You have to find out what other people have done. You have to also think about what you want to do, because sometimes it doesn't come from the literature, but maybe you have worked with these women, and you have seen certain things that these also reflect their marginality, and you want to work on those. So all of that then tells you what can be done. So if you are just doing experience of marginality, then maybe you take on a qualitative approach where you also talk to those women about how do you see your marginality, what do you think marginality is. So in qualitative approach, a lot of times we define the concepts from our population. We do discuss how it has been defined in the literature, but we also depend on a lot on what participants have to say about it. Okay, maybe they see marginality in a different way than you see it, or then maybe a scholar sitting in the UK sees it. I'm just giving an example. So you go about in that way, where you will not measure it, but you can narrate, or you can describe their experiences. You can see what aspects they see where they're marginalized. Maybe they do not feel so marginalized in the economic sense, but they feel marginalized in terms of access to public places and stuff like that. Okay. On the other hand, if you want to measure, then you probably take a quantitative approach where you see what are the measurable constructs that marginality can be broken into. Income may be one construct. Access to public places might be one construct, where you can measure how many times do they go to the, for example, if it's a village setting, how do they go to the Gram Sabha? Do they participate in the elections? Participate in the sense, do they go to the voting booths and poll? Or maybe if you want to see political marginality, so again, what is their voting percentages? What number of Dalit women have actually, with disability, have actually ever stood in the elections in the area where you are doing your study? So that would depend on the setting of your study. How you are defining marginality. Again, maybe when you're doing the study, you may consider all three aspects. Maybe you do not want to consider all three aspects, so maybe you take on any two aspects. Maybe you want to consider more, because there might be more things you think also reflect marginality. So it completely depends on that, and how that concept of marginality has been defined in the previous literature, in theory, in sociology, or whatever your discipline you're coming from. That would help you define it, and then you go about it, breaking it down. So if you're measuring, you'll have to actually break it down in smaller measurable constructs. You'll have to form the variables, and how those variables might be related to it. Okay.
Okay.
I hope.
Okay, ma'am. And
sense.
if we want to compare, I mean, if in order to measure, should we compare it with women of other caste or with males? I mean, is that recommendable?
That's completely up to you. You can obviously do that. Then again, that's completely up to you. If you want to show a contrast between the experiences of Dalit women and higher caste women, you can totally do that. You can collect data from both sets of sample. Then you choose a sample from Dalit women, a sample of women from Dalit communities, and you choose a sample of from women from the upper caste or the general category, or whatever you want to say. And then you collect, if you're measuring, again, if you're going for a quantitative approach, you collect data for the same variables from both the samples. And then as I said, there are tests and analytical tests that you can run to compare two groups. Okay, so then you compare those, and then you say that okay, this shows that this particular group is more marginalized than the other, and then you may come up with why do you think that is. Okay, or you may not come up with that. That's up to, that's on the scope of how you have planned your research. Or you can do that in qualitatives also, where you do comparative case studies. Okay, or you do interviews from both the communities and see how they have defined it differently, or how certain aspects mean more to general women from general categories, while the other women from Dalit communities see it very differently. So you can compare in both approaches. That's very possible. That's very much possible. And yeah, if you're interested in doing that, because that then shows how differently both the communities are placed, then you can go ahead with it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Ma'am, thank you for your valuable lecture. Ma'am, there's a little bit confusion between what is a research paper and a research report. Will you please explain?
Okay. So when I say a research paper, it's more of an academic article which I'll write, which is usually either presented in conferences, and then from there on it's usually published in journal articles, or in a conference proceedings as a paper. So it's more for a academic discussion purpose, where when we talked about types of research, we talked about basic research, which is mostly for knowledge promotion and filling in the gaps or promoting discussions. So that is what it would do. A research report, although it also reports the findings of your research, but it's usually more for a project that you have undertaken, and when you provide a full report of how what you did, it's usually when, especially if you're doing an organizational research or research as a part of an organization. For example, various NGOs do various research, or the government agencies do various researches, and they publish a report, standalone report, which is more detailed, much more detailed than a paper, than an article. And a research article might not cover all the aspects of the research project. Okay, so if I am doing a 2-year-long project on certain thing, I might write an article only on the methodological aspects of it. Okay, that will also be a research paper or article, because it deals with, or it pertains to the process of research. While a research report will actually report the whole research project that you have undertaken. Okay, from the beginning to end, it's usually more detailed. Reports are bulkier, they are bigger, and it's usually for organizational or purposes where you're evaluating or presenting some data for further action. Research article or a paper is usually for academic publications and discussions, and it might limit its scope might be limited to certain aspects of the whole research project. It might also cover the whole research project, but it's usually much more concise, much more academic in its presentation, in its writing. While a research report, depending on the audience, might be a lot more user-friendly, lot more visually appealing. Okay, yeah, I hope it answers your
Yeah, ma'am.
question.
Thank you, ma'am. I got well.
Thank you.
Ma'am, Neelaksh has raised his
Hello.
hand.
Yes, yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Actually, I want to share my own experience or research in the field of research methodology relating to the disability studies, and especially these discourse studies, because that is the part of my own research I'm doing, and I'm using the Foucault lens. And actually, some people asked in the chat that what they meant by discourse studies. So if you allow me, that I would like to share my own knowledge regarding it. And I want to say about it's basically what I have found, that is the difference between it's basically all related to text. and the discourse contain both the oral and written text. So it's upon both. It's actually depend on the researcher on which part they really wants to focus. So if the person is trying to do research or take the data from the oral part, so then they have to, go to the transcription, and they have to then bring out that particular words related what their intention. And you can say that after the transcription, you have to do the content analysis. And then on the written part, it's also include that the content analysis. But in actually in the Foucault or any other like Derridian or Foucault analysis, the Foucault analysis include the epoch studies. You have to bring out the past experiences and how the word transforms and how it changes its meaning, and and it requires a lot of textual or, and it requires a, a big data regarding the subject that you are trying to find out. I faced a problem when I doing a research regarding the social movement. So in that case, I have, faced a lot of problem regarding the the setting the data, that how much the year that I have to cover it up. So in, so that's the another problem, or you can say the part of the Foucauldian analysis. But it also includes the other thing, like you can find that most of the Foucauldian analysis include the pedagogy analysis. They mainly go through the text of the school's literature or college literature, and then they criticize it by using their lens, by saying by putting the main owners of the Foucauldian analysis, like saying that there is a power uh, in in words, that the people put their meaning, and the meaning has been used by someone who is in the power, and that person, try to define and control the people. So through that thing, that the Foucauldian analysis could be done. This is the as far as that I have tried to bring out the what could we can do in the discourse analysis and by using the Foucault analysis. And I hope that people here could, this would be helpful for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilaksh, for sharing your experience. I'm sure it will be helpful. And as you said, there are different, so Foucauldian lens is one lens that you can use. Then so discourse analysis also has a critical discourse analysis, where some, which again, because that's what I said, there are different streams to it, and you can even engage in a Marxist lens to analyze the text or the communication that you are analyzing. As Nilaksh very rightly mentioned, you can analyze verbal or written communication, or now even other forms of representations and communications are being analyzed through this type of analysis. And there are streams, and then how do you engage in it depends on your disciplinary lens also. So yeah, I think it requires a lecture of its own if needed, and there are a lot of ways you can engage in it. But as Nilaksh said, as Nilaksh shared his experience, I think it's important that we do that with each other, because that's how we learn. And thank you.
So I now propose the vote of thanks. On behalf of NCPEDP and CDRT, I take the pleasure to thank our resource person, Ms. Bhavya Jain, for this very insightful session, Ms. Preeti and Mr. Atul for interpreting the lecture, and all the participants for being very active throughout the event. We now meet on 16th March for the next lecture, and the details will be intimated through WhatsApp group and mail.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhavya. Thank you, Devanshi. One small update. Next periodic test is scheduled on Monday, which is 14th of March. Details will be shared via emails and WhatsApp. Thank you. Thank you, Bhavya. Thank you, Atulji. Thank you, Preeti ji.